Go back to the garden where you belong, the CEO's son, Chad, laughed, grabbing a handful of dirt from a decorative planter and throwing it on Victoria's $15,000 Valentino gown. His parents filmed it, giggling. The garden gala guests watched in silence. Victoria wiped her face calmly. "Mr. Patterson," she addressed the CEO, "I was going to invest $500 million to save your company tonight." His smile vanished. Was. As of 3 p.m. today, I own 51% of Patterson Industries. You have 48 hours to clear out your offices. She looked at Chad. "And your son just assaulted the new owner. Security? But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Go back to work and stop pretending you belong here." Victoria Williams stood perfectly still as the words hung in the air. She watched the young man in front of her. He wore an expensive suit and held handfuls of dirt in both hands. His face was red. His eyes were angry. 3 hours earlier, Victoria had stepped out of her black car in front of the Patterson Industries headquarters building. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, California. The sky turned orange and pink. Victoria wore a custom white dress. The dress cost $50,000. She walked slowly toward the entrance. The garden stretched out in front of her. White lights hung from every tree. Red and white roses lined the stone pathways. Tables covered in white cloth held champagne glasses. Men in suits and women in expensive dresses stood in small groups, talking and laughing. This was the Patterson Industries annual Garden Gala. Every year, the Patterson family invited wealthy investors and important business people to this party. They served expensive food and wine. They showed off their success. But this year was different. This year, the Patterson family was desperate. Victoria knew the truth. Patterson Industries was $800 million in debt. The company would close in 3 months without help. The Patterson family needed someone to invest $500 million to save their business. They invited Victoria because they believed she would give them that money. Richard Patterson stood at the entrance greeting guests. He was 55 years old with gray hair and a soft stomach. He wore a black suit that cost $10,000. Next to him stood his wife, Susan. She was 53 years old, with blonde hair and tight skin from plastic surgery. She wore a pink dress and smiled at every guest who walked past. "Welcome, welcome," Richard said to each person. His voice was loud, his smile was big, but his eyes looked worried. Victoria walked past Richard and Susan without stopping. They did not recognize her. They had seen her photo in business magazines, but they expected her to arrive in a limousine with assistants. They did not expect her to arrive alone in a simple black car. Victoria walked through the garden slowly. She observed everything. She saw men in expensive suits drinking champagne. She saw women showing off their jewelry. She saw servers in white uniforms carrying trays of food. Everyone was pretending to be happy, pretending to be successful, pretending everything was fine. Near the bar, Victoria saw a young man. He was 28 years old with blonde hair and a tan. He wore a light blue suit. This was Chad Patterson, Richard and Susan's son. Chad held a glass of champagne in one hand and his phone in the other. "Look at that guy," Chad said loudly to his friends. He pointed at an older man wearing a brown suit. "His suit probably costs less than my shoes." Chad's friends laughed. They drank more champagne. Chad took a selfie and posted it on social media. Victoria kept walking. She moved toward the back of the garden where fewer people stood. She stopped near a row of roses. The flowers were beautiful. Deep red petals and pure white petals. Victoria reached out and touched one gently. "What are you doing here?" Victoria turned around. Chad stood 5 feet away from her. He looked at her white dress. He looked at her brown skin. He looked at her face. His eyes were judgmental. "The staff entrance is in the back," Chad said. He pointed toward the side of the building. "You should not be walking around the party." Victoria said nothing. She looked directly at Chad. Her face showed no emotion. "Are you listening to me?" Chad's voice got louder. "I am talking to you." Victoria remained silent. She stood completely still. Chad's face turned red. He looked around and saw a flower bed nearby. He walked over to it. He bent down and grabbed handfuls of dirt. The dirt was dark and moist. Chad walked back toward Victoria. He raised his hands. "I said go back to work," Chad shouted. He threw the dirt. It hit Victoria's white dress. Dark brown dirt spread across the white fabric. Some dirt landed on her arms. Some landed on her shoes. Chad threw another handful. More dirt covered Victoria's dress. "Stop pretending to be a guest," Chad yelled. Victoria did not move. She did not yell. She did not cry. She looked down at her dress, covered in dirt. Then she looked back at Chad. Her face remained calm. She slowly brushed some dirt off her dress with her hand. The dirt fell to the ground. "Richard!" Chad called out. "Dad, come here!" Richard and Susan heard the noise. They walked quickly toward the back of the garden. Other guests noticed the commotion. They stopped talking and turned to look. Richard and Susan arrived. They saw Victoria standing there, covered in dirt. They saw Chad standing nearby, looking proud of himself. Susan's mouth opened. Then she started laughing. The laugh was high and loud. "Oh my goodness," Susan said between laughs. "Richard, look at this." Richard looked at Victoria. He looked at the dirt on her dress. He started laughing too. His laugh was deep and loud. Susan pulled out her phone. She held it up and started recording a video. "This is perfect," Susan said. She kept recording. Richard laughed harder. He put his hand on his stomach. Other guests stood frozen. Their faces showed shock. No one else was laughing. But no one stopped it either. Victoria stood in the center of attention. Dirt covered her expensive white dress. The woman recorded her on video. The man laughed at her. Their son stood nearby, smiling. Victoria looked directly at Richard. She waited until his laughter slowed down. She waited until he looked at her face. "Mr. Patterson," Victoria said. Her voice was clear and calm. "I came here tonight to offer you $500 million to save your company." Richard's laugh stopped immediately. His mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. His face turned white. Susan stopped recording. She lowered her phone slowly. Chad looked confused. He looked at his father. "What?" Richard said quietly. The garden became completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Victoria reached into her purse. She pulled out a white envelope. The envelope was clean and white against her dirty dress. She opened the envelope slowly. Richard stared at it. His hands started shaking. Victoria removed several papers from the envelope. The documents were official and legal. They had stamps and signatures at the bottom. "These are stock purchase agreements," Victoria said. She held the papers so Richard could see them. "At 3 o'clock this afternoon, I became the majority owner of Patterson Industries." Richard's mouth moved, but no words came out. He reached for the papers. Victoria pulled them back. "I purchased 51% of your company's outstanding shares," Victoria continued. "I bought them through multiple shell companies over the past 6 months. You now own only 48%, Mr. Patterson. I own 51%. That makes me the controlling owner." Susan made a loud, gasping sound. Her hand went to her chest. "That is impossible," Richard said. His voice was weak. You cannot just buy someone's company without them knowing. I can when the shares are traded publicly, Victoria said. Everything I did was completely legal. Every purchase followed proper procedures. Every transaction was recorded. Susan started crying. Tears ran down her face and ruined her makeup. Richard, do something, Susan said. She grabbed his arm. Tell her she cannot do this. Richard looked at the papers in Victoria's hand. He looked at her face. He was trying to understand what was happening. You said you came here to invest, Richard said. You said you would give us $500 million. No, Victoria said. I said I came here to offer you $500 million. I never said I would actually give it to you. I came here for a different reason. Chad pushed forward. He stood next to his father. His face was pale now. The proud smile was gone. Listen, I made a mistake, Chad said quickly. I am really sorry about the dirt. I thought you were someone else. Please, you have to understand. It was just a misunderstanding. Victoria looked at Chad. Her eyes were cold. I do understand, Victoria said. You saw a black woman in a white dress standing near the roses. You assumed I was a gardener. You assumed I did not belong at this party. You threw dirt on me to humiliate me. That was not a misunderstanding. That was exactly what you meant to do. No, I swear I just... Chad started. Victoria raised her hand. Chad stopped talking. Victoria turned her head slightly. Two large security guards stood near the garden gate. They wore black uniforms. Victoria made a small motion with her hand. The guards walked over immediately. Remove this man from the property, Victoria said. She pointed at Chad. He is no longer welcome here. You cannot do that, Susan screamed. This is our property. This is our company party. This is my company now, Victoria said, and I want him removed. The two security guards stepped next to Chad. Each guard took one of Chad's arms. Get your hands off me, Chad yelled. He tried to pull away. The guards held him firmly. Dad, do something, Chad shouted. Mom, tell them to let me go. The guards began walking toward the exit. They pulled Chad along with them. Chad's feet dragged on the ground. This is illegal, Chad screamed. His voice echoed across the garden. You cannot do this! My father will sue everyone! I will sue you! The guards dragged Chad through the garden gate. His voice grew quieter as they took him farther away. Then the gate closed. Chad was gone. All the guests stood watching. No one spoke. No one moved. Richard turned to Victoria. His face had changed. The confidence was completely gone. Now he looked desperate. Please, Richard said. Please, Miss Williams. Sell the shares back to me. I will pay you extra. How much do you want? I will give you anything. The shares are not for sale, Victoria said. Susan grabbed Victoria's arm. Victoria looked down at Susan's hand on her arm. Susan quickly let go. This company is our family legacy, Susan said through her tears. Richard's father built it from nothing. It has the Patterson name. You cannot just take it away from us. Your husband's father built the company, Victoria said, but your husband destroyed it. Patterson Industries is $800 million in debt because of terrible decisions. The company will be bankrupt in 3 months if nothing changes. That is why we need your help, Richard said. Invest in us. Help us fix the company. We can work together. I do not want to work with you, Mr. Patterson, Victoria said. I spent 6 months researching your company. I sent private investigators. I interviewed former employees. I discovered exactly what kind of people you are. Richard's face turned red. What are you talking about? Victoria looked around the garden. Many of the guests were warehouse workers and office staff from Patterson Industries. They stood listening to every word. You pay your warehouse workers minimum wage, Victoria said loudly. These people work 40 hours per week and can barely pay rent. Many of them work second jobs just to survive. Meanwhile, you paid yourself $20 million last year. Several workers in the crowd nodded. Some whispered to each other. "I earned that salary," Richard said. "I am the CEO. I run the entire company." "You ran the company into the ground," Victoria said. "When workers asked for raises, you fired them. I found records of 47 lawsuits from former employees. They sued for unfair treatment and wrongful termination. You settled every case with silence agreements. You paid them money to keep quiet about what you did." Susan's face went pale. "Those lawsuits were just people trying to get money from us. Everyone sues companies these days." "I spoke with 12 of those former employees personally," Victoria said. "They told me their stories. They told me about the toxic workplace you created." Victoria turned to face Susan directly. "Dorothy Johnson worked here for 8 years," Victoria said. "She was a model employee. When her father died, she asked for one day off to attend his funeral. You called her a lazy person who always makes excuses. You used a racial slur when you said it." Susan's mouth opened. "That is not true. I never said that." "Dorothy has witnesses," Victoria said. 3 people heard you say it." Victoria turned back to Richard. "Carlos Rivera worked as an engineer for 12 years, Victoria said. "He designed 3 of your most successful products. He asked to be promoted to management. You told him no. You told him that certain people would never be management material. He asked what you meant. You said he should just keep doing technical work and stay in his place." Richard's hands became fists. "These people are lying. They want money. They want attention." "They want justice," Victoria said. "They worked hard for your company. They were loyal. You treated them like they were worthless." Victoria looked around at all the guests. Everyone was listening. Some people had their phones out recording everything. "Your family built wealth on the backs of people you refused to respect," Victoria said. "You lived in a mansion while your workers struggled to feed their families. You flew in private jets while your workers took the bus. You wasted company money on luxury parties while the business was failing. That ends today." Richard's voice became angry. "You have no right to judge me. You do not know anything about running a company. You came from nothing. I came from nothing and built everything," Victoria interrupted. "You were born with everything and destroyed it. That is the difference between us, Mr. Patterson." The garden was completely silent. "You have 48 hours, Victoria said. 2 days. Remove all your personal belongings from the executive offices. Take your photos, your awards, your furniture. After 48 hours, security will remove anything left behind and throw it away." 2 days? Susan said. "That is not enough time." "It is more than enough time," Victoria said. "I already installed new leadership. The company will begin operating under new management immediately." Richard stepped closer to Victoria. His face was very close to hers. "Who did you choose?" Richard asked. His voice was quiet and dangerous. "Who do you think can run my company?" Victoria did not step back. She looked directly into Richard's eyes. "Jennifer Martinez will be the new CEO," Victoria said. Several people in the crowd gasped. A woman near the back started crying. Other workers turned to look at her. Jennifer Martinez stood there with her hand over her mouth. Tears ran down her face. Jennifer was 43 years old. She had worked in the Patterson Industries warehouse for 15 years. She supervised 20 workers and did her job excellently. But Richard and Susan never promoted her to management. "Marcus Thompson will be the chief operating officer," Victoria continued. A tall black man in the crowd froze. His eyes went wide. This was Marcus Thompson. He was 40 years old and had worked as an engineer for 12 years. He created designs that saved the company millions of dollars. Richard refused to promote him. Marcus stood perfectly still. Then tears started falling from his eyes. The warehouse workers and office staff began hugging each other. Some were crying, some were smiling. For the first time in many years, they felt hope. Richard looked around at his employees celebrating. His face turned dark red with anger. "This is my company," Richard shouted. "My family's company. You cannot just walk in here and take it." Victoria reached into her purse again. She pulled out her car keys. "I already did," Victoria said. She turned and began walking toward the garden exit. 48 hours, Mr. Patterson. I suggest you start packing." Victoria walked slowly through the garden. Every step was deliberate. Her white dress was still covered in dirt, but she held her head high. The guests moved aside to let her pass. No one spoke to her. They simply watched. Jennifer Martinez pushed through the crowd. She was a short woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a simple black dress that she bought at a department store. Her face was wet with tears. "Miss Williams," Jennifer said. Her voice shook. "Miss Williams, please wait." Victoria stopped walking. She turned to face Jennifer. "Is it true?" Jennifer asked. "Am I really going to be CEO?" "Yes," Victoria said. "You have worked here for 15 years. You know this company better than anyone. You care about the workers. You are the right person for this position." Jennifer covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook as she cried. Other warehouse workers gathered around her. They hugged her and congratulated her. Marcus Thompson walked over slowly. He was a tall man with dark skin and gray hair at his temples. He wore glasses and a navy blue suit. His eyes were still wet. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly to Victoria. "I do not know what else to say. Just thank you." "You earned this position," Victoria said. "Richard Patterson refused to see your value. I do not make that mistake." Victoria continued walking toward the exit. Behind her, Richard stood frozen in the same spot. His fists were clenched at his sides. Susan held onto his arm and cried into his shoulder. "We need to call the lawyers," Susan said between sobs. "Richard, call the lawyers right now. She cannot do this. There must be a law against this." Richard did not respond. He stared at Victoria's back as she walked away. The warehouse workers and office staff stayed in the garden. They talked excitedly to each other. Some hugged Jennifer and Marcus. Some called their families on their phones to share the news. For the first time in years, the Patterson Industries employees felt valued. But the wealthy investors and business associates quietly left. They walked quickly to their cars. They did not say goodbye to Richard and Susan. They wanted to distance themselves from the disaster. Victoria reached the garden gate. She walked through it without looking back. Her black car waited in the parking area. Her driver stood next to it. He opened the door for her. "Take me home, please," Victoria said. She got into the back seat. The car drove away from the Patterson Industries headquarters. Victoria looked out the window at the city lights of Los Angeles. Her face showed no emotion. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply sat quietly. Back at the garden, Richard finally moved. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands shook as he dialed a number. "Get everyone out of here," Richard said to Susan. "Tell security to close the gates. End this party right now." Susan nodded. She walked quickly to find the security guards. Richard's phone call connected. "Martin, it is Richard Patterson. I need you at my house tonight. Now. We have an emergency." Martin Cross was Richard's personal lawyer. He had worked for the Patterson family for 20 years. He charged $800 per hour. "What happened?" Martin asked on the phone. "Someone took my company," Richard said. His voice was tight with anger. "A woman named Victoria Williams bought 51% of the shares. She showed up at our garden gala tonight and announced that she owns Patterson Industries. "That is impossible," Martin said. "Someone would have notified you about a large stock purchase." "She used shell companies," Richard said. "Multiple purchases over 6 months. Small enough that no one noticed." Martin was quiet for a moment. "If she used shell companies to hide her identity, we might be able to challenge this in court. That could be considered stock manipulation." "Good," Richard said. "That is what I needed to hear. Come to my house in 1 hour. Bring everything you have on corporate takeover law." Richard ended the call. He looked around the garden. Most of the guests were gone now. Only the employees remained, talking and celebrating. Richard felt rage burning in his chest. Susan returned with 2 security guards following her. "Clear everyone out," Richard told the guards. "The party is over." The security guards walked into the garden. "Everyone needs to leave now," one guard announced. "The event is finished." Jennifer, Marcus, and the other workers slowly walked toward the exit. They were still smiling. They talked quietly to each other as they left. Richard and Susan walked to their car. A black Mercedes waited near the building entrance. But as they got closer, Richard saw something that made him stop. News cameras were set up outside the main gates. At least 5 television crews stood there with cameras and bright lights. Reporters held microphones and waited. "How did they know to come here?" Susan asked. "Someone at the party must have called them," Richard said. Richard and Susan had no choice. They had to walk past the cameras to reach their car. Richard took a deep breath. He grabbed Susan's hand and they walked forward. As soon as the reporters saw them, everyone started shouting. "Mr. Patterson, is it true you lost control of your company? Mr. Patterson, can you comment on the accusations of workplace discrimination? Mrs. Patterson, did you really make racist comments to employees? Mr. Patterson, what about the video of your son throwing dirt on Victoria Williams?" Richard tried to walk faster. He pulled Susan along with him. The cameras followed them. Bright lights shined in their faces. Susan began crying harder. She raised her purse to cover her face from the cameras. "No comment," Richard said loudly. "We have no comment at this time." "Mr. Patterson, are the reports true that Patterson Industries is $800 million in debt?" Richard's face turned red. He wanted to yell at the reporters. He wanted to tell them to leave him alone. But his lawyer always told him never to speak to the press during a crisis. Richard and Susan finally reached their car. Richard opened the door and pushed Susan inside. He walked around to the driver's side. The reporters surrounded the car. They pressed their cameras against the windows. Richard started the engine and drove forward slowly. The reporters moved out of the way. The car drove through the gates and onto the street. Inside the car, Susan sobbed loudly. "This is a nightmare," Susan said. "Everyone saw what happened. All those people watched her humiliate us. It will be on the news. Everyone will know." Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly. He drove toward their home in Beverly Hills. The drive normally took 20 minutes. Tonight, it felt like hours. Richard's phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. Text messages kept arriving. He knew they were from friends and business associates asking what happened. He ignored all of them. When they arrived home, the mansion was dark. Richard pulled into the circular driveway. He and Susan sat in the car for a moment without moving. "What are we going to do?" Susan asked quietly. "We are going to fight," Richard said. "Martin will find a way to prove what she did was illegal. We will take her to court. We will get the company back." They got out of the car and walked into the house. The mansion had 12 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms. It sat on 2 acres of land in the most expensive neighborhood in Beverly Hills. Richard and Susan bought it 15 years ago for $12 million. Now it was worth $20 million. Susan went upstairs to the bedroom. Richard went to his office. He sat behind his large wooden desk and opened his laptop. He searched for Victoria Williams on the internet. Articles appeared from business magazines. Photos showed Victoria at various events wearing expensive suits. One article called her the most successful black female investor in America. Another article said her net worth was $3 billion. Richard felt sick to his stomach. He closed the laptop. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from his son, Chad. Richard answered. "Dad, you need to come get me," Chad said. His voice sounded panicked. "The security guards left me outside the gates. I do not have my car. I called a taxi, but people keep recognizing me. Someone threw a drink at me. People are yelling things at me." "Take the taxi home," Richard said. "I cannot come get you right now." "But Dad!" Richard ended the call. He did not have time to deal with Chad right now. Richard opened a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey and a glass. He poured the glass full and drank it in one swallow. The whiskey burned his throat. Someone knocked on the office door. "Come in," Richard said. Martin Cross entered. He was 60 years old, with white hair and an expensive gray suit. He carried a leather briefcase. "Tell me everything," Martin said. He sat down across from Richard. Richard spent the next hour explaining what happened at the garden gala. He showed Martin the stock purchase documents that Victoria had displayed. Martin read through everything carefully. "This is sophisticated," Martin said finally. "She planned this for months, maybe longer. Every purchase was structured to stay under the reporting threshold." "But it is illegal, right?" Richard asked. "She hid her identity. She manipulated the market." Martin shook his head slowly. "Using shell companies is legal if done properly. Buying shares on the open market is legal. If every transaction followed SEC regulations, then, technically, she did nothing wrong." "There has to be something," Richard said. His voice rose. "I am not going to let some woman steal my family's company." Martin looked at Richard carefully. "There might be one approach. If we can prove she bought the shares with the specific intent to harm you personally, we could argue this was a malicious takeover. But we would need evidence of her intentions." "She admitted it," Richard said. "She said she planned this for 6 months. She said she researched the company. She wanted to punish us." "That is not enough," Martin said. "We need documents, emails, recorded conversations, something that proves this was personal revenge rather than a business decision." Richard stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at his swimming pool and tennis court. Everything he built was falling apart. "Find something," Richard said. "I do not care what it costs. Find a way to prove what she did was illegal. I want my company back." Martin nodded. "I will file an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning. We will request that the court freeze the stock transfer until we can investigate." Richard turned around. "How long will that take?" "Could be weeks, could be months," Martin said. "Corporate law moves slowly." "I do not have months," Richard said. "She gave me 48 hours to clear out my office." "Then we better move fast," Martin said. He stood up and grabbed his briefcase. "I will start making calls tonight. We will find something." After Martin left, Richard sat alone in his office. The house was quiet. He picked up his phone and opened social media. The first thing he saw made his blood run cold. A video was going viral. The title read, "Rich Kid Throws Dirt on Black Woman at Fancy Party." Richard clicked on the video. It showed Chad throwing dirt on Victoria's white dress. It showed Richard and Susan laughing. It showed Susan recording with her phone. The video had been viewed 10 million times in just 2 hours. Richard read the comments. Thousands of people were calling his family racist. People were posting the address of the Patterson Industries building. They were calling for boycotts. Richard threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and cracked. He sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. Everything was falling apart. But he would not give up. He would fight Victoria Williams with everything he had. 2 days passed slowly. Richard barely slept. He spent both nights in his office making phone calls and meeting with lawyers. The video of Chad throwing dirt reached 100 million views. News channels played it constantly. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates. On the morning of the third day, Richard woke up at 6 o'clock. He had fallen asleep at his desk. His neck hurt. His mouth tasted terrible. He looked at his phone. Martin Cross had sent a text message at 5 o'clock in the morning. The message said, "Emergency motion denied. Judge says stock purchase was legal. No grounds for injunction." Richard threw his phone down. He stood up and walked to the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror. His eyes were red. His face looked older. He had not shaved in 2 days. Susan appeared in the doorway. She wore a white bathrobe. Her hair was messy. Her face had no makeup. "What are we doing today?" Susan asked. Her voice was flat and tired. "We are going to the office," Richard said. "I am not leaving my company. That woman can call security. She can call the police. I do not care. I am not walking away." Susan nodded slowly. "I will get dressed." At 7:30 in the morning, Richard and Susan drove to the Patterson Industries headquarters building in downtown Los Angeles. The sun was already bright and hot. Richard parked in his reserved spot near the entrance. The spot had a sign that said CEO. They walked into the building together. The security guard at the front desk looked uncomfortable when he saw them. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," the guard said quietly. Richard did not respond. He and Susan walked to the elevator. They rode up to the 10th floor where the executive offices were located. The doors opened. Richard and Susan walked down the hallway to the corner office. Richard's office. He had worked in this office for 18 years. The door had a gold nameplate that said, "Richard Patterson, Chief Executive Officer." Richard unlocked the door with his key. He and Susan went inside. The office was large. Windows covered 2 walls and showed views of downtown Los Angeles. A massive wooden desk sat in the center. Behind the desk were shelves filled with awards and photos. Photos of Richard with politicians. Photos of Richard at company events. Photos of the Patterson family. Susan sat down in one of the leather chairs. Richard walked to his desk and turned on his computer. "What are you doing?" Susan asked. "I am working," Richard said. "This is my office. This is my company. I am going to do my job." At 8 o'clock in the morning, Victoria's black car pulled into the parking lot. She wore a black suit and carried a leather briefcase. She walked through the lobby. The security guard stood up quickly. "Good morning, Miss Williams," the guard said. "Good morning," Victoria said. "Is Mr. Patterson in the building?" The guard looked nervous. "Yes, ma'am. He arrived about 30 minutes ago. He and his wife went up to the executive offices." Victoria nodded. "Thank you." She took the elevator to the 10th floor. The doors opened and she walked down the hallway. Her shoes made sharp sounds on the tile floor. She stopped in front of the office with Richard's nameplate on the door. Victoria tried the door handle. It was locked from the inside. She knocked firmly 3 times. "Mr. Patterson," Victoria called, "open the door, please." Inside the office, Richard looked at Susan. Susan's eyes were wide with fear. "Do not open it," Susan whispered. Richard stood up. He walked to the door, but did not unlock it. "This is my office," Richard said loudly through their door. "I am not leaving." "Your 48 hours ended at midnight," Victoria said calmly. "You were supposed to remove your belongings. You are now trespassing." "You cannot trespass in your own company," Richard shouted. I built this business. My father built this business. You stole it. You are the criminal here." Victoria pulled her phone from her pocket. She made a call. "This is Victoria Williams," she said into the phone. "I am at Patterson Industries headquarters. The former CEO is refusing to vacate the premises. Please send officers immediately." She ended the call and put her phone away. "I called the police," Victoria said through the door. "They will be here in approximately 10 minutes. You can leave now on your own, or you can leave in handcuffs. The choice is yours." Inside the office, Susan started crying again. "Richard, please," Susan said. "Let us just go. This is not worth getting arrested." "I am not leaving," Richard said. His jaw was clenched tight. "She is bluffing. The police will not arrest me. I have friends in the police department. I donate money to their charities." Victoria waited in the hallway. She did not sit down. She stood perfectly still with her briefcase in her hand. 8 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. 2 police officers stepped out. One was a tall white man in his 40s. The other was a shorter Latino man in his 30s. Both wore dark blue uniforms. "Miss Williams?" the taller officer asked. "Yes," Victoria said. "Thank you for coming so quickly. The former CEO of this company is locked inside that office. He was given 48 hours to remove his belongings. That deadline passed at midnight. He is now trespassing on private property." The officer nodded. He walked to the door and knocked loudly. "Police!" he called. "Open the door, please." Richard unlocked the door slowly. He opened it and looked at the 2 officers. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," Richard said. His voice suddenly sounded friendly. "This woman is trying to steal my company. She used illegal methods to buy company stock. I need you to remove her from the building." The taller officer looked at Victoria. "Ma'am, do you have documentation proving ownership of this company?" Victoria opened her briefcase. She removed a folder filled with papers. She handed them to the officer. "These are the stock purchase agreements," Victoria said. "These are the corporate filings showing the transfer of ownership. These are the official documents registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Everything is legal and properly documented." The officer read it through the papers carefully. He showed some pages to his partner. They both read in silence for several minutes. Finally, the officer looked at Richard. "Sir, these documents appear to be legitimate," the officer said. "Miss Williams is the legal owner of this company. You need to leave the premises." "That is ridiculous," Richard said. His face turned red. "Did she pay you? Is that what this is? Everyone can be bought, right?" The shorter officer stepped forward. His hand moved to his belt where his handcuffs hung. "Sir, you need to calm down," the officer said firmly. "You have 2 options. You can leave voluntarily right now, or we can arrest you for trespassing. Which do you prefer?" Susan stood up from her chair. She grabbed Richard's arm. "Richard, stop," Susan said. "Please, just stop. Let us go." Richard looked at his wife. He looked at the police officers. He looked at Victoria standing calmly in the hallway. "Fine," Richard said. The word came out like poison. "We will leave. But this is not over. I have lawyers. We will see you in court." "I look forward to it," Victoria said. Richard and Susan began gathering items from the office. Richard took photos off the shelves. Susan grabbed a few personal items from the desk drawers. They moved slowly, trying to take as much time as possible. The taller police officer looked at his watch. "You have 10 minutes, the officer said. "Take only personal items. Everything else belongs to the company." Richard grabbed a box from the corner. He started throwing things into it. Photos, a trophy, some books. Susan took another box and did the same. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching. Her face showed no emotion. After 10 minutes, Richard and Susan each carried a box. They walked toward the elevator. The police officers followed them. Victoria followed behind everyone. They rode the elevator down to the lobby, in silence. Richard stared straight ahead. His hands gripped the box so tightly his knuckles turned white. When the elevator doors opened, Richard and Susan walked quickly across the lobby. News cameras waited outside the front doors. Someone must have tipped off the media. Richard stopped walking. He saw the cameras through the glass doors. "Not again," Susan whispered. But there was no other exit. They had to walk through the front doors. Richard took a deep breath. He and Susan pushed through the doors. Immediately, reporters rushed forward. Cameras surrounded them. Microphones were pushed toward their faces. "Mr. Patterson, were you just escorted out by police?" "Mr. Patterson, is it true you refused to leave your former office?" "Mrs. Patterson, do you have any response to the workplace discrimination allegations?" Richard kept walking. He held the box in front of his face to block the cameras. Susan did the same. They reached their car and threw the boxes in the back seat. As Richard started to get in the car, one reporter pushed closer. "Mr. Patterson, what is your next move? Are you going to accept that you lost the company?" Richard stopped. He turned to face the reporter. His face was dark red with rage. "I did not lose anything," Richard shouted. "This company is mine. My family built it. Some people think they can take what does not belong to them. But there are laws in this country. There is justice. We will fight this in court, and we will win." He got in the car and slammed the door. He drove away from the building quickly. Victoria watched from the lobby windows. The police officers stood next to her. "Will they cause more trouble?" the shorter officer asked. "Probably," Victoria said, "but everything I did was legal. They have no case." The officers nodded and left. Victoria rode the elevator back to the 10th floor. She walked into the office that used to belong to Richard. She walked to the windows and looked out at the city. Her phone rang. She answered it. "Miss Williams? This is Martin Cross," a man's voice said. "I am Richard Patterson's attorney. I wanted to inform you that we are filing an emergency lawsuit this afternoon. We have 3 members of the board of directors who are challenging your takeover. We believe you manipulated stock prices and violated securities laws. A judge will hear our case tomorrow morning." Victoria smiled slightly. It was the first time she had smiled in days. "Mr. Cross, I welcome your lawsuit," Victoria said. "I have done nothing illegal. Your case will fail, but I understand you need to try. That is your job." "We will see you in court, Miss Williams," Martin said. He ended the call. Victoria put her phone away. She looked at the office around her. She walked to the desk and sat down in the leather chair. She opened her briefcase and pulled out her laptop. She had work to do, a company to rebuild, employees to help. She did not have time to worry about Richard Patterson's lawyers. Outside the building, Richard sat in his car in a parking lot 3 blocks away. He had just ended his call with Martin. "They filed the lawsuit," Richard said to Susan. 3 board members agreed to join us. David Morrison, James Chen, and Robert Walsh. They are all friends of my father. They agree that what Victoria did was wrong. Susan wiped tears from her face. "Do we have a chance?" "Martin says yes," Richard said. "If we can prove she manipulated the market, the judge might reverse the takeover." "What if we lose?" Susan asked quietly. Richard gripped the steering wheel. "We will not lose. We cannot lose. If we lose everything." Richard made phone calls all afternoon. He sat in his car in the parking lot for 2 hours. He called 3 men who served on the Patterson Industries board of directors. These men had known Richard's father for decades. The first call was to David Morrison. David was 72 years old. He owned a chain of hardware stores across California. He had served on the Patterson Industries board for 30 years. "David, I need your help," Richard said into the phone. "Victoria Williams stole my company using illegal methods. I am filing a lawsuit to get it back. I need board members to support me." David was quiet for a moment. "Richard, I saw the video, the one with your son throwing dirt. That was very bad." "I know," Richard said. "Chad made a terrible mistake. But that does not give Victoria Williams the right to steal a company. What she did was illegal. She manipulated stock prices. She hid her identity. That violates securities laws." "Are you sure about that?" David asked. "My lawyer says we have a strong case," Richard said. "But I need board members to stand with me. Will you join the lawsuit?" David sighed. "Your father was my friend. I owe it to his memory to help his son. Yes, I will join your lawsuit." Richard felt relief wash over him. "Thank you, David. Thank you." Richard called James Chen next. James was 65 years old. He owned a technology company in Silicon Valley. He had been on the Patterson Industries board for 15 years. James agreed to join the lawsuit after 20 minutes of conversation. He said he believed in loyalty to old friends. The third call went to Robert Walsh. Robert was 68 years old. He owned several restaurants and hotels. He had known Richard's father since college. Robert was harder to convince. He had read the news articles about the workplace discrimination allegations. But finally, he agreed to join the lawsuit for the sake of his old friendship with Richard's father. By 6 o'clock in the evening, Richard had 3 board members committed to the lawsuit. He called Martin Cross and told him the news. "Good," Martin said. "I will file the emergency lawsuit tonight. We are claiming that Victoria Williams engaged in market manipulation and fraudulent concealment. We will request that the court reverse the stock transfer." "When will we go to court?" Richard asked. "Tomorrow morning," Martin said. "I am requesting an emergency hearing. Given the urgency of the situation, a judge should hear us right away." That night, Richard and Susan barely spoke. They sat in different rooms of their mansion. Richard drank whiskey in his office. Susan took sleeping pills and went to bed early. The next morning, Richard wore his most expensive suit, dark blue with thin white stripes. He wore gold cufflinks and his Rolex watch. He wanted to look powerful and successful in front of the judge. Susan wore a conservative black dress and pearl necklace. She looked tired despite the sleeping pills. Dark circles showed under her eyes, even with makeup. They met Martin Cross at the courthouse in downtown Los Angeles at 8:30 in the morning. The courthouse was a large gray building with tall columns in front. Security guards checked everyone who entered. Martin carried 2 leather briefcases filled with documents. He had brought 2 other lawyers with him. Both were younger men in expensive suits. "The hearing is in courtroom 4, Martin said. "Judge Linda Martinez is presiding. She has a reputation for being very strict and very fair." "Is that good for us?" Richard asked. "It means she will follow the law exactly," Martin said. "If we can prove Victoria broke the law, Judge Martinez will rule in our favor. But if we cannot prove it, she will not help us." They walked through the courthouse hallways. The floors were polished marble. Their footsteps echoed. They found courtroom 4 and entered. The courtroom was large, with wooden benches for spectators. The judge's bench sat high at the front. An American flag hung on the wall. Court reporters and clerks sat at tables below the judge's bench. Richard, Susan, Martin, and the other lawyers sat at one table. The table on the opposite side was empty. People filed into the courtroom. Richard recognized several reporters. News cameras were not allowed inside, but reporters could take notes. David Morrison, James Chen, and Robert Walsh entered and sat behind Richard's table. At 8:45, Victoria entered the courtroom. She wore a gray suit. Her hair was pulled back. She carried a simple black briefcase. 3 lawyers walked with her. They sat at the opposite table. Victoria did not look at Richard. She opened her briefcase and removed papers. Her face was calm and professional. At 9 o'clock exactly, a door opened at the front of the courtroom. A bailiff entered. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Linda Martinez presiding." Everyone stood up. Judge Martinez entered through the door. She was a Latina woman in her early 60s. She had gray hair and wore black robes. She walked to the bench and sat down. "Please be seated," Judge Martinez said. Her voice was strong and clear. Everyone sat down. Judge Martinez opened a folder and read from it. "We are here for an emergency hearing in the matter of Patterson versus Williams. Mr. Cross, you represent the plaintiffs?" Martin stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. I represent Richard Patterson and 3 members of the Patterson Industries Board of Directors. We are requesting that this court reverse the stock transfer that gave Victoria Williams control of Patterson Industries." "On what grounds?" Judge Martinez asked. "Market manipulation and fraudulent concealment, Your Honor," Martin said. "Miss Williams used multiple shell companies to hide her identity while purchasing company stock. This violates securities regulations. We believe she engaged in a deliberate scheme to steal the company from its rightful owner." Judge Martinez looked at Victoria's table. "And who represents the defendant?" A woman stood up. She was in her 50s with red hair and a dark blue suit. "Sandra Blake, Your Honor. I represent Victoria Williams. The accusations made by the plaintiffs are completely false. Miss Williams broke no laws. Every stock purchase followed proper procedures. This lawsuit is frivolous and should be dismissed." "We will let the evidence determine that," Judge Martinez said. "Mr. Cross, present your case." Martin stood and walked to the center of the courtroom. One of his younger lawyers set up a screen and projector. "Your Honor, Victoria Williams grew up poor in Detroit, Michigan," Martin began. Photos appeared on the screen. They showed a young Victoria as a child. She wore old clothes and stood in front of a small apartment building. She lived in poverty. She struggled, and somewhere along the way, she developed anger toward successful white families. Victoria's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Cross is speculating about my client's emotional state without any evidence." "Sustained," Judge Martinez said. "Mr. Cross, stick to facts and evidence." "Yes, Your Honor," Martin said. He clicked to the next slide. It showed a timeline. Miss Williams spent 6 months secretly purchasing Patterson Industries stock. She used shell companies to hide her identity. She never disclosed her intentions. On the evening of the company's annual gala, she revealed that she had taken control. This was a calculated attack. Martin continued talking for 30 minutes. He showed documents and charts. He talked about shell companies and stock purchases, but he never presented evidence that Victoria broke any laws. He only suggested that her actions seemed suspicious. Finally, Martin concluded, "Your Honor, Miss Williams targeted the Patterson family because of personal prejudice. She wanted revenge against a successful white family. Her takeover was motivated by race and anger, not legitimate business purposes. We ask the court to reverse this unjust action." Judge Martinez looked at Martin. "Do you have any evidence that Miss Williams violated specific securities laws?" Martin hesitated. "Your Honor, the pattern of behavior clearly suggests—" "That is not what I asked," Judge Martinez interrupted. "Do you have evidence of specific legal violations, yes or no?" "The shell companies were used to conceal her identity, Your Honor," Martin said. "That constitutes fraud." "Using shell companies is legal if done properly," Judge Martinez said. "Do you have evidence that the shell companies were used illegally?" Martin looked uncomfortable. "We believe further investigation will reveal—" "So you have no evidence," Judge Martinez said. "Miss Blake, present your defense." Sandra Blake stood up. she walked to the center of the courtroom carrying a thick folder. "Your Honor, this is very simple," Sandra said. "My client bought stock in a publicly traded company. She bought shares on the open market. Every transaction was recorded. Every purchase followed SEC regulations. Here are the transaction records." Sandra handed the folder to the bailiff, who gave it to Judge Martinez. The judge opened it and began reading. "These documents show every stock purchase," Sandra continued. "The dates, the amounts, the prices paid, everything was done legally. Mr. Cross suggests that using shell companies is suspicious. But shell companies are used in business transactions every day. They are completely legal." Judge Martinez read through the documents carefully. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of pages turning. After several minutes, Judge Martinez looked up. "These documents appear to be in order. Miss Blake, continue." "Thank you, Your Honor," Sandra said. "Mr. Cross claims my client targeted the Patterson family out of racial prejudice. That is offensive and false. My client targeted Patterson Industries because it was a failing company with corrupt leadership. She saw an opportunity to help workers who were being mistreated." Sandra clicked a remote. The screen showed a new image. It was a list of names. "These are 12 former Patterson Industries employees," Sandra said. "My client interviewed them as part of her research. They described a toxic workplace filled with discrimination and abuse. Your Honor, we would like to call some of these individuals as witnesses." "Objection," Martin said quickly. "This is an emergency hearing about stock transactions, not a workplace discrimination trial." "The witnesses are relevant to motive," Sandra said. "Mr. Cross claims my client acted out of racial prejudice. These witnesses will prove that my client acted out of legitimate business concerns." Judge Martinez nodded. "I will allow it. Call your first witness." Sandra looked at the spectator benches. "I call Dorothy Johnson to the stand." A black woman in her 50s stood up. She wore a simple dress and looked nervous. She walked to the witness stand. The bailiff asked her to raise her right hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the bailiff asked. "I do," Dorothy said quietly. Sandra walked toward the witness stand. "Miss Johnson, please tell the court where you worked." "I worked at Patterson Industries for 8 years," Dorothy said. "I was an office administrator." "Did you enjoy your job?" Sandra asked. "I loved my job," Dorothy said. "I loved the work, but the environment was very difficult." "Can you explain what you mean?" Sandra asked. Dorothy took a deep breath. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson treated certain employees very badly, especially black employees and Latino employees." Susan gasped loudly from her seat. Richard grabbed her hand. "Can you give a specific example?" Sandra asked. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "My father died 3 years ago. I asked Mrs. Patterson for 1 day off to attend his funeral. She said I was lazy and always making excuses. Then she called me a very bad word, a racial slur." "What word did she use?" Sandra asked. Dorothy said the word quietly. Several people in the courtroom gasped. Susan stood up. "That is a lie," she shouted. "I never said that. She is lying." Judge Martinez slammed her gavel on the bench. "Mrs. Patterson, sit down and be quiet. If you interrupt again, I will have you removed from this courtroom." Susan sat down. She was shaking with anger and fear. "Miss Johnson, were there witnesses?" Sandra asked. "Yes," Dorothy said. 3 other people heard her say it. Sandra nodded. "Thank you, Miss Johnson. No further questions." Sandra called her next witness. "I call Carlos Rivera to the stand." A Latino man in his 40s walked to the witness stand. He was sworn in and sat down. "Mr. Rivera, where did you work?" Sandra asked. "Patterson Industries," Carlos said. "I was an engineer for 12 years." "Did you design products for the company?" Sandra asked. "Yes," Carlos said. I designed 3 major products that generated millions of dollars in revenue. Did you ever ask for a promotion? Sandra asked. Many times, Carlos said. I asked to be promoted to management. Mr. Patterson always said no. Did he ever explain why? Sandra asked. Carlos nodded. One time I asked him directly. I said I had the qualifications and the experience. I asked what I needed to do to become a manager. He told me that certain people would never be management material. I asked what he meant by certain people. He said I should just keep doing technical work and stay in my place. Richard stood up. That is a lie, he shouted. His face was dark red. He is lying. I never said that. Judge Martinez slammed her gavel again. Mr. Patterson, sit down immediately. You are in contempt of court. One more outburst and I will have the bailiff remove you. Richard sat down slowly. His hands were shaking. Judge Martinez looked at both legal teams. We will take a 30-minute recess. When we return, Miss Blake will finish presenting witnesses. Then I will make my decision. We will reconvene at 11 o'clock. The judge stood up. Everyone in the courtroom rose. Judge Martinez walked out through the side door. Richard turned to Martin. They are lying. Both of them are lying. Martin looked worried. Richard, it does not matter if they are lying. The judge believes them. And more importantly, their testimony proves Victoria had legitimate business reasons for the takeover. That destroys our case. Richard felt his world collapsing. Everything was falling apart. Richard stood in the courthouse hallway during the recess. Susan stood next to him crying quietly. Martin and his team of lawyers stood several feet away, talking in low voices. David Morrison, James Chen, and Robert Walsh walked over to Richard. The 3 board members looked uncomfortable. Richard, this is not going well, David said quietly. Those witnesses were very convincing. They are lying, Richard said through clenched teeth. Someone paid them to lie. Victoria Williams probably gave them money to make up those stories. Do you have proof of that? Robert asked. Richard said nothing. He had no proof. Richard, I think we should consider withdrawing from the lawsuit, James said. This is becoming embarrassing. The news reporters are writing down everything. This will be in every newspaper tomorrow. No, Richard said firmly. We are not giving up. The judge has not made her decision yet. We still have a chance. The 3 board members exchanged looks. They did not seem convinced. At 11 o'clock, everyone returned to the courtroom. Judge Martinez entered, and everyone stood. Then she told them to sit. Miss Blake, you may continue, Judge Martinez said. Sandra Blake stood. Your Honor, we have no additional witnesses. The evidence is clear. Victoria Williams conducted extensive research before purchasing Patterson Industries stock. She discovered a pattern of discrimination and financial mismanagement. She made a sound business decision based on legitimate concerns. Every stock purchase was legal. The plaintiffs have presented no evidence of wrongdoing. Judge Martinez nodded. Mr. Cross, do you wish to present any additional evidence? Martin stood slowly. Your Honor, we maintain that the use of shell companies to conceal identity constitutes fraudulent behavior. That is your opinion, Mr. Cross, Judge Martinez said, but opinion is not evidence. Do you have actual evidence of fraud? Do you have documents showing illegal activity? Do you have witnesses who can testify to criminal behavior? Martin opened his mouth and then closed it. No, Your Honor, but we believe with more time to investigate. This is an emergency hearing, Mr. Cross, Judge Martinez interrupted. You requested urgent action. I granted you this hearing. You have had your opportunity to present evidence. You brought me speculation and assumptions. That is not enough. Judge Martinez picked up a pen. She made notes on a legal pad in front of her. I am ready to make my ruling. Judge Martinez said. The courtroom became completely silent. I have reviewed all documents submitted by both parties. I have heard testimony from witnesses. The facts are clear. Richard leaned forward in his seat. His heart was pounding. Miss Victoria Williams purchased shares of Patterson Industries stock over a period of 6 months. Judge Martinez continued. Every purchase was made on the open market. Every transaction was recorded with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Every document was filed properly. The plaintiffs claim that Miss Williams used shell companies to hide her identity. That is true. However, using shell companies for business transactions is completely legal when done according to regulations. The plaintiffs have presented no evidence that Miss Williams violated any regulations. Martin's shoulders slumped. He knew what was coming. The plaintiffs also claim that Miss Williams acted out of racial prejudice and personal revenge, Judge Martinez said. But the witnesses presented by the defense prove otherwise. Miss Williams researched the company and discovered legitimate concerns about workplace discrimination and financial mismanagement. She had valid business reasons for her actions. Judge Martinez looked directly at Richard. Mr. Patterson, the evidence shows that your company had serious problems. Employees testified under oath about discrimination and mistreatment. Whether you want to accept that or not, it is now part of the court record. Miss Williams identified a troubled company and made a legal business decision to acquire it. Judge Martinez picked up her gavel. I rule in favor of the defendant, Victoria Williams, Judge Martinez announced. The stock transfer is legal and valid. Miss Williams is the rightful owner of Patterson Industries. This lawsuit is dismissed. She brought the gavel down hard. The sound echoed through the courtroom. Richard felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He could not breathe. Susan grabbed his hand and squeezed it tight. She was sobbing loudly now. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, she was not finished. I find that this lawsuit was frivolous. The plaintiffs had no evidence to support their claims. They wasted this court's time and resources. Therefore, I am ordering Richard Patterson to pay a fine of $5 million to the court within 30 days. Richard's head snapped up. $5 million? Yes, Mr. Patterson, Judge Martinez said. Her voice was stern. $5 million. You filed a lawsuit with no evidence. You made serious accusations without proof. There are consequences for that behavior. Martin stood quickly. Your Honor, that is an extremely large fine. Your request is denied, Judge Martinez said. The fine stands. Mr. Patterson has 30 days to pay. Judge Martinez shuffled some papers on her desk. There is one more matter to address. Mr. Chad Patterson faces criminal charges for assault. The incident at the Garden Gala, where he threw dirt on Miss Williams, constitutes battery under California law. That case will be tried separately. I am setting the trial date for 2 weeks from today. Mr. Patterson, make sure your son appears in court on that date, or I will issue a warrant for his arrest. She looked around the courtroom. We are adjourned. Judge Martinez stood and walked out. Everyone in the courtroom rose and then slowly sat back down. Richard remained frozen in his chair. $5 million. He had to pay $5 million. Plus the legal fees for Martin and his team. That would be hundreds of thousands more. Reporters rushed out of the courtroom to file their stories. David Morrison, James Chen, and Robert Walsh quietly left without speaking to Richard. They wanted to distance themselves from this disaster. Victoria stood up and gathered her papers. She put them in her briefcase calmly. Sandra Blake shook her hand. Congratulations, Sandra said. Thank you, Victoria replied. Send me your final invoice. Victoria walked toward the courtroom exit. She had to pass by Richard's table. As she walked past, Richard looked up at her. This is not over, Richard said quietly. His voice was filled with hate. Victoria stopped. She looked down at him. "Yes, it is," Victoria said. Her voice was calm and final. "You lost. Accept it and move on." She continued walking and left the courtroom. Richard, Susan, and Martin walked out into the courthouse hallway. News reporters swarmed them immediately. "Mr. Patterson, how do you feel about the judge's decision?" "Mr. Patterson, can you afford to pay the $5 million fine?" "Mr. Patterson, do you plan to appeal?" Richard pushed through the crowd without answering. Martin and Susan followed. They made their way outside to the courthouse steps. More cameras waited there. Richard covered his face with his hand. Susan cried into a tissue. They rushed to Richard's car in the parking lot. Inside the car, they sat in silence for several minutes. Richard gripped the steering wheel but did not start the engine. "What are we going to do?" Susan asked. Her voice was small and broken. "I do not know," Richard admitted. For the first time, he sounded defeated. Martin sat in the back seat. "Richard, I need to discuss my fees. My firm has spent significant time on this case. You will receive an invoice for approximately $200,000. Richard closed his eyes. "Fine. Send it to my accountant." "There is another issue," Martin continued. "The 3 board members who joined the lawsuit may also be liable for the court fine. They might sue you for bringing them into this. You should prepare for that possibility." "Great," Richard said bitterly. "Anything else?" Martin said nothing more. He got out of the car and walked to his own vehicle. Richard finally started the engine. He drove Susan back to their mansion in Beverly Hills. The drive took 40 minutes. Neither of them spoke. When they arrived home, Richard went straight to his office. He opened his laptop and checked his bank accounts. He had about $3 million in cash. The rest of his wealth was tied up in assets: the mansion, the vacation homes, the cars, the stock shares. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his accountant. Richard answered. "Stephen, I was just about to call you," Richard said. "Richard, we have a serious problem," Stephen said. His voice sounded stressed. "The Patterson Industries stock you still own has crashed. After the news of the trial spread, investors lost all confidence. The stock price dropped to almost nothing. Your shares are basically worthless now." Richard felt dizzy. "How much are they worth?" "Maybe $200,000, Stephen said. "Yesterday, they were worth $15 million. But the market reacted very badly to today's news." Richard put his head in his hands. "So I have $3 million in cash and $200,000 in stock. That is it?" "Yes," Stephen said. "And you owe $5 million to the court, plus $200,000 to your lawyer. Richard, you do not have enough cash to pay those debts." "What do I do?" Richard asked. "You need to sell assets immediately," Stephen said. "The mansion, the vacation homes, the cars, everything. You need to liquidate everything to raise cash." Richard looked around his office. This office was in a mansion he had owned for 15 years. He loved this house. He raised his son here. This was supposed to be his forever home. "How much is the mansion worth?" Richard asked quietly. "About $15 million, Stephen said. "You could sell it and pay off all your debts. You would have maybe $8 million left over." $8 million is still a lot of money," Richard said. "Not really," Stephen said. "Not for your lifestyle. You spend about $1 million per year just on basic expenses. That $8 million would last you 8 years if you do not change anything. But Richard, you need to understand something. Your reputation is destroyed. No company will hire you. You cannot earn income anymore. Whatever money you have from selling assets is all the money you will ever have." Richard felt tears in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he cried. "Start the process," Richard said. "List the mansion for sale. List the vacation homes. List everything." "I will call the real estate agents today," Stephen said. "Richard, I am sorry. I really am." Stephen ended the call. Richard sat alone in his office. The sun was setting outside the windows. Orange light filled the room. Susan appeared in the doorway. "I heard you on the phone. Are we selling the house?" "We have to," Richard said. "We have no choice." Susan walked into the room and sat down in a chair. She looked at the expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, the view of the pool outside. "Where will we go?" Susan asked. "I do not know," Richard said. "Somewhere cheap, somewhere no one knows us. We cannot stay in Los Angeles. Everyone here knows what happened." Susan started crying again. Richard did not try to comfort her. He had nothing left to give. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Chad. The message said, "Dad, my lawyer called. He says I need to take a plea deal, community service or possible jail time. What should I do?" Richard typed back, "Take the deal. We cannot afford another trial." He put his phone down and stared at the wall. Everything he built was gone. Everything he believed about himself was wrong. He did not know who he was anymore. 2 weeks passed slowly. Richard and Susan moved through their mansion packing boxes. Real estate agents came to photograph the house. They took pictures of every room, every piece of furniture, every view. A young woman named Ashley represented the sale. She wore a bright yellow dress and smiled constantly. She walked through the mansion, taking notes. "This is a beautiful property," Ashley said. "The market is strong right now for luxury homes. I think we can get 15 million, maybe more." "How long will it take to sell?" Richard asked. "Could be fast, could be slow," Ashley said. "The right buyer has to come along. Someone who can afford 15 million in cash or has excellent financing. That limits the pool." "We need it to sell quickly," Richard said. "We have debts to pay." Ashley nodded. "I understand. I will market it aggressively. We will have open houses every weekend." The mansion went on the market the next day. Photos appeared on real estate websites. The listing described it as a stunning Beverly Hills estate with 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, pool, tennis court, and spectacular views. Richard also listed the 4 vacation homes, one in Aspen, Colorado, one in Miami, Florida, one in Lake Tahoe, California, one in Scottsdale, Arizona. Together, they were worth about $8 million. Susan spent days sorting through her belongings. She had closets full of designer clothes, shoes that cost $1,000 per pair, handbags that cost $5,000 each, jewelry worth hundreds of thousands. "I have to sell all of this?" Susan asked Richard. She held up a diamond necklace. "This was a gift from your father." "We need the money," Richard said. He did not look at her. "Sell everything that has value." Susan contacted a luxury consignment shop in Beverly Hills. A woman came to the mansion and looked through Susan's clothes, shoes, bags, and jewelry. She made an offer of $400,000 for everything. Susan cried as she signed the papers. These items were her identity. Without her designer clothes and jewelry, who was she? Richard sold his cars. He owned a Mercedes, a BMW, and a Porsche. Together, they brought in $300,000. He kept one older Toyota sedan for basic transportation. Richard spent hours every day applying for jobs online. He sent his resume to companies across California. He applied to be CEO at other corporations. He applied for vice president positions. He even applied for middle management roles. Every application was rejected. Sometimes he received an automated email saying the position was filled. Most times he received no response at all. Richard called former business associates, men he had known for 20 years, men he played golf with and attended parties with. "Tom, it is Richard Patterson," he said into the phone. I am looking for new opportunities. I wondered if your company has any executive positions available." Tom's voice was cold. "Richard, I saw the news. Everyone saw the news. I cannot help you. I am sorry." Tom ended the call quickly. Richard tried 5 more calls. The conversations were all similar. No one wanted to be associated with him. The video of Chad throwing dirt on Victoria had now been viewed 100 million times. Every news channel had shown it. Every website had written articles about it. The Patterson name was ruined. Meanwhile, Chad prepared for his court appearance. His lawyer had negotiated a plea deal with the prosecutor. Chad would plead guilty to assault. In exchange, he would receive 200 hours of community service and mandatory counseling instead of jail time. "If you do not take this deal, you could go to jail for 6 months, Chad's lawyer explained. His name was Philip Ross. He was 50 years old and specialized in criminal defense. "The video evidence is clear. You threw dirt on her. That is battery. The prosecutor has an easy case." "But it was just dirt," Chad complained. "It was not even that much dirt. People are acting crazy about this." "Chad, you physically threw something at another person," Philip said. "That is a crime. You are getting a very good deal here. Take it." Chad appeared in court on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed with reporters. Judge Martinez presided again. Chad stood next to his lawyer. He wore a dark suit that his mother picked out. He tried to look sorry and respectful. "Mr. Patterson, how do you plead to the charge of assault?" Judge Martinez asked. Chad looked at his lawyer. Philip nodded at him. "Guilty, Your Honor," Chad said quietly. Judge Martinez made notes. "I accept your guilty plea. I am sentencing you to 200 hours of community service. You will complete this service at the Green Hope Community Garden in South Los Angeles. You will teach children about gardening and plants. You will work 4 hours every Saturday and Sunday until your 200 hours are complete." Chad's mouth opened. South Los Angeles was a poor neighborhood. He had never been there. He did not want to go there. Additionally, Judge Martinez continued, "You will attend counseling sessions twice per week for 6 months. A probation officer will monitor your compliance. If you miss any community service hours or counseling sessions, I will send you to jail for 6 months. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Chad said. His voice sounded small. "Mr. Patterson, I hope you learned something from this experience," Judge Martinez said. "You have lived a privileged life. You have never faced consequences for your actions. That ends today. Community service and counseling are opportunities for growth. I suggest you take them seriously." She banged her gavel. "We are adjourned." Chad walked out of the courtroom. Reporters shouted questions at him. He kept his head down and did not answer. Richard and Susan waited for him in the hallway. 200 hours, Chad said. "That is going to take forever." "Just do what the judge said," Richard told him. "Do not cause any more problems." 3 months passed. Richard and Susan sold everything. The mansion sold for $14 million. The vacation homes sold for $7 million total. With the money from Susan's clothes and jewelry and Richard's cars, they had about $22 million in cash. Richard paid the $5 million fine to the court. He paid $200,000 to Martin Cross for legal fees. He paid various other debts and expenses. When everything was settled, they had about $15 million remaining. $15 million is still a lot of money, Susan said. They sat in the mansion on their last night there. The house was empty. All the furniture had been sold or put in storage. "It sounds like a lot," Richard said, "but we have no income, no way to earn more. This $15 million is all we will ever have. If we spend $1 million per year, it will last 15 years. Then we will have nothing." "So we need to spend less," Susan said. "Much less," Richard said. "We cannot stay in Los Angeles. Everything here is expensive. Everyone here knows us. We need to start over, somewhere else." They chose Phoenix, Arizona. The cost of living was lower than Los Angeles. The weather was warm. Most importantly, no one there knew them. Richard found a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The rent was $1,500 per month. The apartment was ordinary. It had basic appliances, white walls, and brown carpet. It was smaller than the master bedroom in their old mansion. On a Saturday morning in September, Richard and Susan loaded their remaining belongings into a moving truck. They owned much less now. Some clothes, some personal items, a few pieces of furniture. Everything fit in one truck. Susan cried as they drove away from Beverly Hills. She looked back at the neighborhood where they had lived for 15 years. The tall palm trees, the beautiful homes, the perfect lawns. "I cannot believe this is happening," Susan said. "How did we lose everything so fast?" Richard did not answer. He knew how it happened. He had been arrogant and cruel. He treated people badly and thought there would be no consequences. He was wrong. They drove to Phoenix. The drive took about 6 hours through the desert. The landscape was flat and brown. When they arrived, the temperature was 108 degrees. The heat hit them when they opened the car doors. The apartment complex was called Desert View Apartments. It was a 3-story building with beige paint. The apartments all looked exactly the same. Small balconies with metal railings, parking spaces in front. Richard unlocked apartment number 214. He and Susan walked inside. The apartment smelled like old carpet and paint. The living room was small. The kitchen had old appliances. The bathroom had a cracked tile floor. Susan walked through the room slowly. She looked at the small spaces, the cheap fixtures, the basic everything. She started crying again. "I cannot live here," Susan said. "This place is horrible." "This is what we can afford now," Richard said. His voice was flat and tired. "We need to make it work." They spent the day unpacking boxes. They set up their bed in the master bedroom. They arranged their clothes in the small closet. They put dishes in the kitchen cabinets. By evening, they were exhausted. They ordered pizza for dinner. It was delivered by a young man on a motorcycle. Richard paid with cash, and they ate sitting on the floor because they had not bought a table yet. "What are we going to do here?" Susan asked. "We do not know anyone. We have no friends, no social life, nothing." "We are going to survive," Richard said. "That is all we can do right now." Richard spent the next weeks applying for jobs in Phoenix. He applied to every company he could find, but the result was the same as before. No one would hire him. His reputation had spread across the country. Everyone knew what happened. Richard and Susan lived quietly in their small apartment. They bought basic furniture from discount stores. They shopped at regular grocery stores instead of specialty markets. They watched television at night instead of attending parties and galas. Susan had no one to talk to. All her friends were back in Los Angeles. She tried calling a few of them, but the calls were awkward. Her former friends did not know what to say to her. They felt sorry for her, but also wanted to maintain distance. Eventually, Susan stopped calling. Richard spent most of his time alone. He sat in the apartment staring at the walls. He thought about his old life constantly. The mansion, the respect, the power. All of it was gone. One afternoon, Susan sat next to Richard on their cheap couch. "Do you ever think about what that woman said?" Susan asked. "Victoria Williams? At the garden gala?" "What did she say?" Richard asked. "She said respect costs nothing, but disrespect costs everything," Susan said. "She was right. We lost everything because we did not respect people." Richard said nothing. He knew Susan was right, but he did not want to admit it. Admitting it meant accepting that he caused his own destruction. That was too painful to face. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, Chad began his community service. Every Saturday and Sunday morning, he drove to the Green Hope Community Garden in South Los Angeles. The garden was in a poor neighborhood with small houses and chain-link fences. Chad wore old jeans and a t-shirt for the work. He met a woman named Miss Patricia who ran the garden. She was 60 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes. "Welcome, Chad," Miss Patricia said. "We are glad to have your help. The children will be here in 30 minutes. They love working in the garden." Chad looked around. The garden had rows of vegetables, fruit trees, and flower beds. Everything was neat and organized. But the neighborhood around it looked rough. "What am I supposed to do?" Chad asked. "You will teach the children how to plant seeds, how to water properly, how to identify weeds," Miss Patricia said. "You will help them care for the plants. Gardening teaches patience and responsibility. Maybe you will learn those things too." Chad spent that first day feeling angry and resentful. He did not want to be here. He did not want to work with children. He wanted his old life back. But slowly, over the following weeks, something started to change. A 10-year-old boy named Deshaun loved asking questions. He wanted to know everything about every plant. "Why do tomatoes grow on vines?" Deshaun asked. "I do not know," Chad admitted. "Let us look it up," Deshaun said. He pulled out a gardening book and they read together. Chad started to see these children as real people with real dreams. He began to understand how privileged his own life had been. These children had so little, but they worked so hard and appreciated everything. After 3 months of community service, Chad sat in the garden one Sunday afternoon. Deshaun sat next to him. They had just planted tomato seeds together. "Thank you for teaching me, Mr. Chad," Deshaun said. "I want to have my own garden someday." Chad felt something strange. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. He felt proud. Not proud of himself, but proud of Deshaun. Proud to help someone else succeed. "You will have a great garden, Deshaun," Chad said. "You work harder than anyone I know." For the first time in his life, Chad realized that other people mattered. Their feelings mattered. Their dreams mattered. It was a small realization, but it was a start. In Phoenix, Richard sat alone in his apartment. He had just watched Victoria Williams on television. She was being interviewed on a national news program. She talked about dignity, respect, and justice. Richard turned off the television. He looked at his reflection in the blank screen. He barely recognized himself anymore. He had lost weight. His hair had turned grayer. His eyes looked empty. For the first time, Richard understood that he had destroyed his own life. Victoria Williams did not destroy him. She simply held up a mirror and showed him who he really was. And what she showed him was ugly. Richard walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot of his apartment complex. This was his life now, this small apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. No friends, no purpose, no future. He finally understood that respect and character mattered more than money or family name. But this understanding came too late to save him. While Richard stared out his apartment window in Phoenix, Victoria stood in front of the Patterson Industries building in Los Angeles. Workers arrived for their morning shift. They walked through the front doors talking to each other. It was Monday morning. The sun was bright. Victoria wore a black suit and carried her briefcase. She looked up at the building. A construction crew was installing something above the main entrance. The crew removed the old sign that said Patterson Industries in gold letters. They lifted it away with a crane. Then they raised a new sign into place. The new sign was modern and clean. It said, Williams Enterprises, in silver letters. Workers stopped on the sidewalk to watch. Some took photos with their phones. Some smiled. This was a new beginning. Victoria walked inside and took the elevator to the 10th floor. She walked to the office that used to belong to Richard. The nameplate on the door had been changed. It now said, Jennifer Martinez, Chief Executive Officer. Victoria knocked on the door. "Come in," Jennifer called. Victoria entered. Jennifer sat behind the desk working on her computer. She wore a professional navy blue dress. Her dark hair was styled neatly. She looked up and smiled when she saw Victoria. "Good morning," Jennifer said. She still looked slightly amazed to be sitting in this office. "I was just reviewing the quarterly reports." "How are they looking?" Victoria asked. She sat down in a chair across from Jennifer. "Not good yet," Jennifer admitted. "We are still losing money, but I have some ideas for changes we can make." "Tell me," Victoria said. Jennifer opened a folder. "First, we need to modernize the warehouses. The equipment is old and breaks down constantly. That slows production. Second, we need better safety measures. Last month we had 3 workplace accidents. Third, worker morale is low because they are paid so little. If we increase wages, productivity will increase." Victoria nodded. "I agree with all of that. Make the changes. You have full authority." "The cost will be significant," Jennifer said. "New equipment, safety improvements, and wage increases will cost approximately $10 million in the first year." "Do it," Victoria said. "I am putting another $50 million into the company. Use it to make Williams Enterprises a place where people want to work." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you for believing in me." "You earned this position," Victoria said. "Now show everyone what you can do." Victoria left Jennifer's office and walked down the hall. She stopped at another office. The nameplate said Marcus Thompson, Chief Operating Officer. She knocked and entered. Marcus sat at his desk, studying engineering blueprints. He looked up and stood when Victoria entered. "Miss Williams," Marcus said. "Good morning." "Please sit down," Victoria said. "I wanted to check on your progress." Marcus sat and gestured to the blueprints. "I am redesigning the production process for our main product line. The current process wastes time and materials. I can reduce production costs by 20% and improve quality." "How long until you can implement the changes?" Victoria asked. 3 months, Marcus said. "I need to train the workers on the new procedures, but I am confident this will work." "Excellent," Victoria said. "You have my full support." That afternoon, Victoria called a meeting in the large conference room. All employees were invited. Warehouse workers, office staff, managers, everyone. The room was packed. People stood along the walls because there were not enough chairs. Victoria stood at the front of the room. Jennifer and Marcus stood next to her. "Thank you all for coming," Victoria said. Her voice was clear and strong. "I want to discuss the changes we are making at Williams Enterprises." Everyone listened silently. "First, effective immediately, the minimum wage for all workers is now $25 per hour," Victoria announced. The room erupted. People gasped. Some started clapping. Workers who had been earning $15 per hour could not believe what they were hearing. A warehouse worker named James raised his hand. He was 45 years old, with gray hair and weathered hands from years of physical labor. "Is this real?" James asked. His voice shook with emotion. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious," Victoria said. "You work hard. You deserve fair compensation." James covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook as he cried. The woman next to him hugged him. "Second, we are providing full health insurance to all employees," Victoria continued. "Medical, dental, and vision coverage. The company will pay 80% of the premiums." More applause and cheers filled the room. "Third, we are creating a college tuition assistance program. If you have children who want to attend college, Williams Enterprises will help pay their tuition. Education is important. We want to support your families. A woman in the back row started crying. Her name was Maria. She had 2 teenage children. She had been saving for years trying to afford their college expenses. Now, she would have help. "These changes begin immediately," Victoria said. "Your next paycheck will reflect the new wage. The insurance will be active in 2 weeks. The tuition program will accept applications starting next month." The room erupted in applause. Workers stood up and clapped. Some hugged each other. Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. Victoria held up her hand for quiet. The room slowly settled down. "I also want to be clear about expectations," Victoria said. Her voice became more serious. "This company has a new culture now. We treat everyone with respect. Discrimination of any kind will result in immediate termination. Harassment will not be tolerated. Everyone deserves dignity and safety at work. If you see problems, report them. We will investigate every complaint seriously." People nodded. They understood. "We have a lot of work ahead of us," Victoria said. "This company was failing. We need to make it successful again. That will require effort from everyone. But I believe we can do it. Together." More applause filled the room. Victoria nodded and left. Jennifer and Marcus stayed to answer questions from employees. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria made more changes. She sold the 3 private jets that Richard had used for personal travel. The jets sold for $12 million total. She used that money to buy new equipment for the warehouses. She sold the luxury company cars. Richard and the executives had driven Mercedes and BMWs paid for by the company. Those cars sold for $1 million. Victoria used that money to improve the warehouse ventilation and lighting systems. Construction crews worked in the warehouses every night. They installed new machines. They fixed broken equipment. They painted the walls and improved the break rooms. Workers noticed the changes immediately. The warehouses were brighter and cleaner. The air quality improved. The new equipment worked faster and more reliably. James, the warehouse worker who had cried during the meeting, received his first paycheck with the new wage. He opened it in his car after work. His weekly pay was $900 before. Now it was $1,500. James sat in his car and stared at the number. With this pay, he could afford his rent without working a second job. He could buy better food for his family. He could save money for emergencies. He called his wife. "Maria, you are not going to believe this." "What?" his wife asked. "My paycheck is $1,500, James said. "The new owner kept her promise. She really did it." His wife started crying on the phone. "We can finally breathe. We can finally stop worrying every single day." Similar conversations happened across the company. Workers called their families with good news. Some workers who had been planning to quit decided to stay. The word spread through Los Angeles. Williams Enterprises was a good place to work. 3 months passed. Jennifer worked 12-hour days reorganizing the company. She promoted qualified employees who had been ignored under Richard's leadership. She fired 3 managers who refused to change their discriminatory behavior. She established clear policies and procedures. Marcus implemented his new production process. He trained workers carefully. The changes worked exactly as he predicted. Production costs dropped by 20%. Product quality improved significantly. Productivity increased. Workers who felt valued and fairly paid worked harder. They took pride in their work. They showed up on time and put in effort. Within 3 months, productivity was up by 30%. 6 months after Victoria took control, Williams Enterprises became profitable. The company earned $2 million in profit that quarter. It was the first profitable quarter in 3 years. Jennifer called Victoria with the news. "We did it! We are making money again!" "You did it," Victoria corrected. "You and Marcus and all the workers. This is your success." News media noticed the transformation. A reporter from a national business magazine came to interview Victoria, Jennifer, and Marcus. The article was titled "How New Leadership Saved a Failing Company." A national television morning show invited Victoria to appear. She flew to New York City for the interview. She sat on a couch across from the host, a woman named Sarah Bennett. "Miss Williams, your story has captured national attention," Sarah said. "Tell us what happened." Victoria explained the Garden Gala incident. She explained the discrimination and financial mismanagement she discovered. She explained her decision to take over the company. "Some people say you acted out of revenge," Sarah said. "How do you respond to that?" "I acted out of justice," Victoria said calmly. The Patterson family mistreated employees for years. They discriminated based on race and paid unfair wages while taking millions for themselves. That needed to stop. "What message do you want people to take from your story?" Sarah asked. Victoria looked directly into the camera. "Dignity is not negotiable. Every person deserves respect regardless of their background or the color of their skin. If you are in a position of power, use that power to help people, not hurt them. And if someone disrespects you, do not accept it. Stand up for yourself." The interview aired 2 days later. 15 million people watched it. The video clip was shared millions of times on social media. Williams Enterprises received thousands of job applications. People wanted to work for a company that valued its employees. The company's reputation grew stronger every day. Jennifer hired 50 new workers to handle increased production demands. She made sure to interview candidates from diverse backgrounds. The new workforce included people of different races, ages, and life experiences. Marcus opened new warehouses in 3 cities: Denver, Colorado; Portland, Oregon; Miami, Florida. Each new warehouse was built with modern equipment and safe working conditions. Each location offered the same fair wages and benefits as the Los Angeles headquarters. Victoria visited each new location for the opening ceremonies. She shook hands with workers. She toured the facilities. She made sure everything met her standards. At the Denver warehouse opening, a young Latino man named Miguel approached Victoria. He was 25 years old and had just been hired as a supervisor. "Miss Williams, I wanted to thank you," Miguel said. "I applied to 50 companies. No one would hire me because I did not have a college degree. Jennifer hired me based on my skills and experience. This job changed my life." "You earned this position," Victoria said. "Work hard and treat people well. That is all I ask." Victoria returned to Los Angeles. She sat in her office late one evening. The city lights sparkled outside her windows. She looked at a framed photo on her desk. The photo showed her mother, Patricia. Patricia had died 3 years ago from cancer. She never got to see Victoria's success. She never knew her daughter became a billionaire. Victoria touched the photo gently. "I hope I am making you proud, Mama. I am trying to do the right thing. I am trying to help people the way you always helped people." Victoria's assistant, Margaret Chen, knocked on the door. "Miss Williams, you have been here for 14 hours, Margaret said. "You should go home and rest." "I will leave soon," Victoria said. "I just need to finish reviewing these reports." Margaret smiled. "You are changing lives, you know. All those workers and their families. You gave them hope." Victoria nodded slowly. "That is the goal. Make the business successful and help people at the same time. It is possible. Richard Patterson just never tried." Margaret left, and Victoria continued working. She reviewed financial projections for the next year. Everything looked positive. The company was growing. Profits were increasing. Employee satisfaction was at record highs. But Victoria felt something missing. The business success was satisfying, but it was not enough. She had punished the Pattersons. She had helped the workers. What came next? Victoria looked at her mother's photo again. Patricia had always taught her to think beyond herself, to help the community, to lift others up. Victoria pulled out a legal pad and began writing notes. An idea was forming in her mind, an idea that would extend far beyond Williams Enterprises, an idea that would create lasting change. She wrote for 2 hours. When she finished, she had outlined a plan for something new, something bigger, something that would honor her mother's memory and help thousands of people. Victoria picked up her phone and made a call. Despite the late hour, the person answered immediately. "This is Victoria Williams," she said. "I need you to help me establish a charitable foundation. I want to commit $100 million to start. Can you come to my office tomorrow to discuss the details?" The person on the phone agreed eagerly. Victoria ended the call and looked out at the city lights again. For the first time in months, she smiled. The next morning, Victoria met with her legal team. They gathered in the conference room at Williams Enterprises. 5 lawyers sat around the table with laptops and folders. "I want to establish a charitable foundation," Victoria said. "The Williams Foundation. Its purpose will be to provide low-interest loans and mentorship to minority business owners across America." The lead attorney, a man named David Greenberg, took notes. He was 60 years old with white hair and glasses. "How much are you committing to the foundation?" David asked. $100 million to start," Victoria said. "I will add more as the foundation grows." The lawyers exchanged glances. $100 million was an enormous commitment. "Who will run the foundation?" another lawyer asked. "I will oversee it personally," Victoria said. "But I will hire a team of advisors, people with experience in small business development and community investment." Over the next month, Victoria worked with her legal team to establish the foundation properly. They filed paperwork with the government. They created bylaws and procedures. They opened bank accounts and set up an office. Victoria hired 6 advisors. They were experts in business development, finance, and community organizing. Together, they created programs to help entrepreneurs. The foundation offered low-interest loans to people who could not get traditional bank loans. It provided free business mentorship and training. It connected new business owners with established professionals who could guide them. Victoria announced the Williams Foundation at a press conference. Reporters filled the room. Cameras recorded everything. The Williams Foundation will help Black, Latino, Asian, and immigrant entrepreneurs start their own businesses, Victoria said. She stood at a podium with the foundation's logo behind her. Traditional banks often refuse loans to minority business owners. They claim these entrepreneurs are too risky. But risk is not about race. It is about opportunity. We will provide that opportunity. A reporter raised her hand. "Miss Williams, why are you focusing specifically on minority business owners?" "Because the system has failed them," Victoria said. "I grew up poor in Detroit. I know how hard it is to start with nothing. I was lucky. I worked hard and got opportunities. Many people work just as hard but never get opportunities because of their race or background. This foundation will change that." The Williams Foundation opened offices in 20 cities across America: New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, Phoenix, Seattle, and others. Each office had a staff ready to review loan applications and provide mentorship. In the first month, the foundation received 5,000 applications. People wanted help starting bakeries, restaurants, construction companies, tech startups, and more. Victoria personally reviewed 100 applications. She wanted to stay connected to the people the foundation served. She read their stories and their dreams. One application came from a young black woman in Atlanta named Keisha Moore. Keisha wanted to start a catering business. She had worked in restaurants for 10 years and was an excellent cook. But banks refused to give her a loan because she had no college degree and limited savings. Victoria approved Keisha's application. The foundation gave her a $50,000 loan at 2% interest. They also assigned her a mentor named Robert Chen, a successful restaurant owner in Atlanta. Within 6 months, Keisha's catering business was thriving. She hired 5 employees, and she catered weddings, corporate events, and private parties. She paid back her loan on time and expanded her business. Victoria flew to Atlanta to meet Keisha. They sat in Keisha's commercial kitchen, surrounded by stainless steel equipment and the smell of fresh bread. "Miss Williams, you changed my life," Keisha said. Tears ran down her face. "Every bank told me no. They said I was not a good investment. But you believed in me." "You did the work," Victoria said. "I just gave you the chance. That is what this foundation is about. Giving people chances they deserve." Similar stories happened across the country. A Latino man in Chicago named Carlos Ruiz opened a construction company. An immigrant family in Houston named the Nguyens opened a grocery store. A black man in Seattle named Terrence Williams started a tech repair shop. The Williams Foundation helped 200 businesses in its first year. Those businesses created over 1,000 jobs. They strengthened communities and proved that minority entrepreneurs could succeed when given fair opportunities. Victoria traveled to different cities, giving speeches at colleges and community centers. She told her story. She explained how she built her wealth from nothing. She encouraged young people to pursue their dreams. At a community college in Detroit, Victoria spoke to 200 students. Most were black and Latino. Many came from poor families. "I sat in seats exactly like yours," Victoria told them. "I grew up in a small apartment not far from here. My mother worked 2 jobs. We had no money, but I had determination. I studied every night. I worked hard. I refused to accept that poverty was my destiny." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "How did you deal with racism? Did people treat you badly because you are black?" "Yes," Victoria said honestly. "Many times. People underestimated me. They made assumptions. They tried to limit me. But I never let their prejudice define me. I used their underestimation as fuel. Every time someone doubted me, I worked harder to prove them wrong." "What if we fail?" another student asked. "Then you get up and try again," Victoria said. "Failure is part of success. I failed many times before I succeeded. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people is not talent or luck. It is persistence. Successful people keep trying even after failure." The students applauded. After the speech, dozens lined up to thank Victoria and ask questions. She stayed for 2 hours talking to every person who wanted to speak with her. While Victoria built her foundation and helped others, Richard sat in his apartment in Phoenix, watching her on television. A news program showed Victoria at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new business in Miami. She smiled and shook hands with the business owner, a young Latino man. Richard stared at the television screen. 6 months had passed since he moved to Phoenix. 6 months of sitting in this small apartment doing nothing. He had no job, no purpose, no friends. Susan sat in the other room. She barely spoke to Richard anymore. Their marriage was dying slowly. They lived in the same small apartment, but existed in separate worlds. "Richard, we are out of milk," Susan called from the kitchen. Her voice was cold and tired. Richard did not respond. He continued staring at Victoria on the television. "Richard," Susan said louder, "did you hear me?" Richard turned off the television. He stood up and walked to the kitchen. Susan stood by the refrigerator. She wore sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her hair was messy. She wore no makeup. She looked nothing like the woman who used to attend Beverly Hills parties. "I heard you," Richard said. "Then go to the store and buy milk," Susan said. "You go," Richard said. "I am busy." "Busy doing what?" Susan asked. Her voice was sharp. "You sit on that couch all day watching television. You do nothing. You contribute nothing." "I am trying to figure out our future," Richard said. Susan laughed bitterly. "We have no future. We are stuck in this terrible apartment in this terrible city because you destroyed everything. This is your fault, Richard. All of it." "You think I do not know that?" Richard shouted. His face turned red. "You think I do not wake up every day knowing I ruined our lives? Then do something about it," Susan shouted back. "Apply for jobs, start a business. Do anything besides sit there feeling sorry for yourself." "I have applied for hundreds of jobs," Richard said. His voice dropped. "No one will hire me. My name is poison. Everyone knows what happened. I am unemployable." Susan's eyes filled with tears. "So this is it? This is the rest of our lives? Living in this tiny apartment, watching our money slowly disappear?" Richard had no answer. He turned and walked back to the living room. He sat on the couch and put his head in his hands. Susan went to the bedroom and closed the door. Richard heard her crying through the thin wall. Richard thought about Victoria's words at the garden gala. She had said respect costs nothing, but disrespect costs everything. She was right. He had treated people with disrespect his entire life. He had been cruel and arrogant. He had believed his family name and money made him superior to others. Now he had nothing. No money, no respect, no power. He was just another ordinary person struggling to survive, and he hated it. But deeper than the hate, Richard felt something else. Shame. He was ashamed of the person he had been, ashamed of how he treated employees, ashamed of how he raised his son, ashamed of everything. But shame without action was worthless. Richard knew that, yet he did not know how to change. He did not know how to become better. He was 55 years old. Could people really change at that age? Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Chad drove to the Green Hope Community Garden for his weekly community service. It was Saturday morning. He had completed 120 hours so far. He had 80 hours remaining. Chad parked his car on the street. The neighborhood still made him uncomfortable. Small houses with bars on the windows, chain-link fences, people sitting on porches watching him. But the garden itself had become different. Chad no longer dreaded coming here. He actually looked forward to it. Miss Patricia greeted him at the garden gate. "Good morning, Chad. Deshaun has been asking about you all week. He wants to show you the tomatoes you two planted together." Chad walked into the garden. Deshaun ran up to him immediately. The 10-year-old boy wore dirty jeans and a t-shirt with a superhero on it. "Mr. Chad! Mr. Chad!" Deshaun called excitedly. "Come look! The tomatoes are getting big." Deshaun grabbed Chad's hand and pulled him toward a row of tomato plants. The plants had grown tall and green. Small tomatoes hung from the vines. "Look how many there are," Deshaun said. He counted them carefully. 15 tomatoes, and they are getting red. Chad knelt down next to the plants. He examined the tomatoes. "You did a great job watering them. These are going to be delicious." "Can I take some home to my grandma?" Deshaun asked. "Of course," Chad said. "You grew them. They are yours." Deshaun smiled so big his whole face lit up. In that moment, Chad felt something he had never felt before when helping someone else. He felt genuine happiness. Not happiness for himself, but happiness for Deshawn. Chad spent 4 hours at the garden that day. He helped children plant seeds, pull weeds, and water plants. He answered their questions patiently. He showed them how to identify different vegetables and herbs. A 7-year-old girl named Jasmine asked him about flowers. "Why are some flowers red, and some are yellow?" "That is a good question," Chad said. "Different flowers have different colors to attract different insects. Bees like certain colors, butterflies like other colors." "That is so cool," Jasmine said. She looked at the flowers with new interest. When the day ended, Chad felt tired but satisfied. This was real work, physical work, work that helped people. It was completely different from his old life of parties and doing nothing. Chad drove to his counseling appointment. He went twice per week to see Dr. Patricia Freeman. Her office was in a small building in downtown Los Angeles. Dr. Freeman was a black woman in her 50s. She wore professional clothes and had kind but firm eyes. She did not let Chad make excuses or avoid difficult topics. Chad sat in the chair across from her desk. Dr. Freeman looked at him and asked her standard opening question. "How was your week, Chad?" "Good," Chad said. "I worked at the garden. I helped the kids plant some new vegetables." "How did that make you feel?" Dr. Freeman asked. Chad thought about it. "Proud, I guess. Like I actually did something useful." "That is progress," Dr. Freeman said. "When you first came here, you were angry about the community service. You felt it was beneath you. Now you feel proud of it. What changed?" "I do not know," Chad said. "I guess I started seeing those kids as real people. They have dreams and feelings just like me. I never thought about that before." "Why not?" Dr. Freeman asked. Chad felt uncomfortable. This was the hard part of therapy. Facing his own ugly truth. "Because I always thought I was better than them," Chad admitted quietly. "Because they were poor and I was rich. Because they were black and Latino, and I was white. I thought that made me superior." "And now?" Dr. Freeman asked. "Now I know that was wrong," Chad said. "Those kids work harder than I ever did. They appreciate everything because they have so little. I had everything and appreciated nothing." "Doctor?" Freeman nodded. "That is an important realization, but realizing you were wrong is only the first step. The next step is understanding why you thought that way. Where did those beliefs come from?" Chad knew the answer. "My parents. They taught me that we were special, that our family was better than other families. They taught me that poor people were poor because they were lazy. I believed them." "Your parents taught you those things," Dr. Freeman said. "But you are an adult now. You have a choice. You can continue believing what your parents taught you, or you can create your own beliefs based on your own experiences. Which will you choose?" Chad looked down at his hands. This was the hardest question anyone had ever asked him. "I want to be better," Chad said finally. "I do not want to be the person I was. That person was cruel and stupid. I want to change." "Change is possible," Dr. Freeman said, "but it is hard work. It requires you to examine every belief you have. It requires you to feel uncomfortable. It requires you to admit you were wrong and hurt people. Are you ready for that work?" Chad nodded slowly. "I think so. I want to be ready." "Then we have more work to do," Dr. Freeman said. They spent the next hour talking about Chad's childhood. They discussed how his parents spoiled him and never taught him consequences. They talked about the racist comments he heard growing up. They examined how those comments shaped his worldview. It was painful. Chad felt ashamed and embarrassed, but Dr. Freeman did not judge him. She simply helped him see clearly. When the session ended, Chad walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for several minutes before starting the engine. He thought about Deshawn and the tomato plants. He thought about his father sitting in an apartment in Phoenix. He thought about the person he used to be. Chad pulled out his phone. He called his father. Richard answered after 3 rings. "Hello?" Richard's voice sounded tired. "Dad, it is Chad," Chad said. "I wanted to talk to you about something." "What is it?" Richard asked. Chad took a deep breath. "I have been going to counseling. My therapist is helping me understand why I did what I did. Why I threw dirt on that woman. Why I thought it was okay." Richard was quiet for a moment. "And what did you learn?" "I learned that you and Mom taught me to be that way," Chad said. His voice was not angry, just honest. "You taught me that we were better than other people, that rich people were superior to poor people, that white people were more important than black people. I believed you because you were my parents." "Chad, that is not fair," Richard started. "Yes, it is," Chad interrupted. "It is completely fair. You raised me to be cruel and entitled, and now I am trying to unlearn everything you taught me. It is really hard, Dad, but I am doing it because I do not want to be that person anymore." Richard did not respond. Chad could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I have to go," Chad said. "I just wanted you to know that I am changing. Maybe you should think about changing too." Chad ended the call. He started his car and drove home. For the first time in his life, Chad felt like he was becoming his own person. Not his parents' son, just himself. In Phoenix, Richard sat holding his phone. Chad's words echoed in his mind. Maybe you should think about changing too. Could he change? Was it too late? Richard did not know the answers, but for the first time, he was asking the questions. Richard set his phone down on the coffee table. Chad's words kept playing in his mind. Maybe you should think about changing too. He walked to the window and looked out at the Phoenix sunset. The sky was orange and purple. Susan came out of the bedroom. She had heard Richard's phone conversation through the thin walls. "What did Chad want?" Susan asked. "He said he is changing," Richard answered. "He said we taught him to be cruel and entitled. He said he is trying to become better." Susan sat down on the couch. "Do you think that is true? That we made him that way?" Richard turned to face her. "Yes, we did. We taught him that our family was special, that money made us superior. We never taught him to respect other people or work hard. We just gave him everything and expected nothing." "So what do we do now?" Susan asked quietly. "I do not know," Richard said, "but I am tired of sitting here feeling sorry for myself. I am tired of being angry at Victoria Williams. She did not destroy us. We destroyed ourselves." Susan looked at Richard with surprise. This was the first time he had admitted that. "I treated people terribly my entire life," Richard continued. "I paid workers minimum wage while I made millions. I refused to promote qualified people because of their race. I created a toxic workplace, and I thought none of it mattered because I had money and power." Richard sat down next to Susan. "I was wrong about everything, and now I have to figure out how to live with that." 1 year passed. Victoria stood in her office at Williams Enterprises headquarters. It was late afternoon. The sun came through the windows, making everything golden. She looked at a framed photograph on her desk. The photo showed her at the garden gala. Her white dress was covered in dirt, but her head was held high. Her face was calm and strong. Below the photograph was a small plaque. Margaret had it made as a gift. The plaque had words engraved on it. "Respect costs nothing, but disrespect costs everything." Victoria touched the plaque gently. 1 year ago, everything changed. She took over Patterson Industries. She helped hundreds of workers. She created Williams Enterprises. She established the Williams Foundation. But something still felt incomplete. Victoria's phone rang. She answered it. "Miss Williams, this is Jennifer," the voice said. "I wanted to give you the update on our expansion. The new warehouses in Denver, Portland, and Miami are all operational. We hired 500 new workers total. Every location is already profitable. That is excellent news, Victoria said. Thank you for the update. There is something else, Jennifer said. The workers wanted me to thank you. Many of them have told me that working at Williams Enterprises changed their lives. They can afford their rent now. They can feed their families. They feel respected and valued. Victoria felt warmth in her chest. Tell them they changed their own lives. They did the work. I just gave them fair opportunities. After the call ended, Victoria sat quietly. She thought about her mother, Patricia. Patricia died 3 years ago from cancer. She worked 2 jobs her entire life. She sacrificed everything for Victoria. She never got to see Victoria's success. Victoria made a decision. She told Margaret to cancel her afternoon meetings. She called her driver and told him to take her to the airport. 3 hours later, Victoria landed in Detroit, Michigan. She rented a car and drove to Woodlawn Cemetery. The cemetery was old, with tall trees and stone pathways. Victoria walked to her mother's grave. The headstone was simple gray granite. It said, Patricia Williams, beloved mother, 1955 to 2020. Victoria knelt down in front of the grave. She placed her hand on the cool stone. Hi, Mama, Victoria said quietly. I know I was just here last month, but I needed to talk to you. The cemetery was silent, except for birds singing in the trees. Williams Enterprises is doing well, Victoria continued. We are profitable. We are helping people. Jennifer and Marcus are excellent leaders. The workers are happy and earning fair wages. Victoria paused. Tears filled her eyes. But Mama, I feel empty sometimes. I accomplished what I wanted. I punished the people who were cruel. I saved the workers. I built something successful. But revenge did not bring me peace. Success did not fill the hole inside me. Victoria wiped her eyes. I keep thinking about what you used to tell me. You said dignity matters, but you also said community matters. You said when you succeed, you have a responsibility to help others succeed too. I think I forgot that part, Mama. I was so focused on proving I could win that I forgot about what comes after winning. Victoria sat down on the grass next to the grave. She stayed there for a long time thinking. Finally, she stood up. I am going to do better, Mama. The Williams Foundation is just the beginning. I am going to help as many people as I can. I am going to use my success to create opportunities for others. That is what you would want. That is what you taught me. Victoria kissed her hand and placed it on the headstone. Then she walked back to her car. When Victoria returned to Los Angeles, she called a meeting with her foundation advisors. They gathered in the conference room. I want to expand the Williams Foundation, Victoria announced. We are currently in 20 cities. I want to be in 50 cities within 2 years. I am committing an additional $100 million. The advisors looked at each other with excitement. I also want to create a scholarship program, Victoria continued. Full scholarships for students from low-income families to attend college. We will pay tuition, books, housing, everything. I want to help 1,000 students in the first year. An advisor named Dr. Helen Morris spoke up. She was a black woman in her 60s who had worked in education for 40 years. Miss Williams, that is incredibly generous, Dr. Morris said. Do you realize how many lives you will change? 1,000 students means 1,000 families lifted up. Those students will graduate and help their communities. The impact will multiply. That is the goal, Victoria said. My mother never went to college. She could not afford it. She was brilliant, but she never got the chance. I want to give that chance to people like her. Santit. The Williams Foundation expanded rapidly. Within 6 months, offices opened in 30 new cities. The foundation helped 500 new businesses start. The scholarship program received 20,000 applications for 1,000 spots. Victoria personally reviewed scholarship applications. She read essays from teenagers describing their dreams and struggles. She read about kids who worked part-time jobs to help their families. Kids who studied late at night after taking care of siblings. Kids who deserved chances but had no resources. Victoria selected 1,000 students. She called each one personally to tell them they received the scholarship. A girl named Destiny Jackson from Atlanta cried on the phone. "Miss Williams, I cannot believe this is real. I am going to college. I am actually going to college. My mama is going to be so happy." "You earned it, Destiny," Victoria said. "Work hard and make your mother proud." Victoria traveled across the country, visiting the foundation's offices. She met with business owners the foundation helped. She spoke at high schools, encouraging students to dream big. She appeared on television programs, sharing her story. One evening, Victoria gave a speech at a community center in Chicago. 300 people filled the room. Most were Black and Latino. Many were poor or working class. Victoria stood at the podium and told her story. She described growing up in a small Detroit apartment. She described her mother working 2 jobs. She described the discrimination she faced building her career. She described the garden gala and what happened there. "Some people think I destroyed the Patterson family out of revenge," Victoria said. "Maybe there was some revenge. I am human, but mostly I did it for justice. The Patterson family treated people cruelly for years. Someone needed to stop them. Someone needed to show them that actions have consequences." The crowd applauded. "But here is what I learned," Victoria continued. "Revenge is empty. Punishment is not enough. What matters is what you build after, how you use your success, who you help along the way." A young man in the audience raised his hand. "Miss Williams, what advice do you have for people like us? People who start with nothing?" "Start anyway," Victoria said. "Do not wait for perfect conditions. Do not wait for someone to give you permission. Find a way to begin. Work harder than everyone else. Learn constantly. And when people doubt you or discriminate against you, use that as fuel. Prove them wrong through your results." "What if we fail?" someone else asked. "Then you learn and try again," Victoria said. "Failure is part of every success story. I failed many times. The difference is I kept trying. Persistence matters more than talent." After the speech, Victoria stayed for 2 hours talking to people. She shook hands, answered questions, and listened to stories. These were her people. People who struggled. People who dreamed. People who needed someone to believe in them. On the flight back to Los Angeles, Victoria felt something she had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not the hollow satisfaction of revenge, but the deep peace that comes from purpose. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Richard sat in his small apartment. The television showed a news story about Victoria Williams and the Williams Foundation. The reporter described how the foundation had helped 700 businesses and 1,000 students in just 1 year. Richard watched Victoria being interviewed. She looked confident and purposeful. She talked about creating opportunities and lifting up communities. Richard picked up his phone. He opened a web browser and searched for volunteer opportunities in Phoenix. He found a nonprofit organization that helped homeless families. They needed volunteers. Richard stared at the website for several minutes. Then he filled out the volunteer application. Susan came out of the bedroom. "What are you doing?" "Applying to volunteer at a homeless shelter," Richard said. Susan looked confused. "Why?" "Because I need to do something useful," Richard said. "I wasted my entire life. I hurt people. I cannot undo that." But maybe I can do something good now. Maybe it is not too late to become better. Susan sat down next to him. Do you really think we can change? I do not know, Richard said honestly. But I have to try. Chad is trying. If my son can change, maybe I can too. The next week, Richard began volunteering at the homeless shelter. He served meals. He helped organize donations. He talked to families who lost everything. One day, Richard met a man named John. John was 45 years old and used to work in construction. He lost his job, then his apartment, then ended up homeless with his 2 children. I am not lazy, John told Richard. I want to work. I want to take care of my kids. The system just makes it so hard to get back up once you fall down. Richard listened. Really listened. For the first time in his life, Richard saw poor people as complete human beings with dignity and worth. Not as failures or problems, but as people facing difficult circumstances. I understand, Richard said, and for the first time, he actually did understand. Months passed. Richard continued volunteering. He helped dozens of families. He learned their names and their stories. He felt useful for the first time in years. Susan started volunteering too. She worked at a food bank organizing donations. She met immigrant families, single mothers, elderly people on fixed incomes. She learned that the world was much bigger and more complicated than she ever understood. Chad completed his 200 hours of community service. On his last day at the garden, Deshawn ran up to him with a gift. It was a small tomato plant in a pot. For you, Mr. Chad, Deshawn said, so you remember us. Chad felt tears in his eyes. He hugged Deshawn. I will never forget you. Thank you for teaching me. I taught you? Deshawn laughed. You were the teacher. No, Chad said. You taught me what really matters. Kindness, hard work, gratitude. You taught me more than you know. 1 year after the garden gala, Victoria sat in her office. It was evening. The city lights sparkled outside her windows. She looked at the framed photograph on her desk, the one from the garden gala with dirt all over her white dress. Victoria picked up the photograph. She looked at her younger self from 1 year ago. That woman was angry and hurt. She wanted revenge. She got it. But revenge was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Victoria set the photograph back on her desk. She looked at the plaque below it. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect costs everything. The Patterson family paid the price for their disrespect. They lost everything. But they were also learning, changing, growing. Maybe that was worth something. Victoria thought about the 700 businesses her foundation helped, the 1,000 students getting college educations, the 500 workers at the new warehouses earning fair wages, the families who now had hope. That was her real legacy. Not destroying the Pattersons, but building something that would help people for generations. Victoria's phone buzzed. It was a text from Jennifer. The message said, "Quarterly profits are up 40%. Employee satisfaction is at record highs. Williams Enterprises is now the most successful company in our industry. Thank you for believing in us." Victoria smiled. She typed back, "You did this. I just gave you the opportunity. I am proud of you." Victoria stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at Los Angeles. Somewhere in this city, people were struggling, working hard, dreaming of better lives. Tomorrow, she would wake up and continue helping them. Victoria thought about her mother one more time. Patricia Williams worked 2 jobs and died tired. But she raised a daughter who changed the world. That was Patricia's real legacy. "I hope I am making you proud, Mama," Victoria whispered. She turned away from the window. She picked up her briefcase and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. She was ready. As Victoria walked out of her office, she glanced back one last time at the framed photograph. The woman covered in dirt but standing tall. The plaque below it with its simple truth. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect costs everything. Victoria smiled and closed the door. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen